When he was kicked out of his last foster home on his 17th birthday, all he had was his little sister and a piece of paper that led to a condemned farm. What they found there, sealed behind a barn wall for 50 years, would change not just their lives, but the meaning of everything they thought they'd lost. If you've ever felt like the world has forgotten you, or if you've ever had to fight for a place to call home, hit that subscribe button. This story is for you. We're building a community here for people who know what it feels like to start over. The clock in the social worker's office ticked with a flat, plastic sound, each click a tiny hammer against my skull. It was my 17th birthday. Outside, a flat gray sky pressed down on the city, the kind of sky that promised a cold, endless rain. Inside, the air was stale, smelling of cheap coffee and disinfectant. My sister, Mia, sat beside me, her small hand clutching the worn strap of her backpack. She was 12, but in that moment, she looked about 6. Her eyes were fixed on a crack in the linoleum floor, as if it held the answers to every question we were too scared to ask. Ms. Albright, our caseworker for the last 2 years, cleared her throat. She was a woman worn smooth by the system she served, her expressions practiced, her sympathy metered out in careful doses. "Leo," she said, her voice attempting a softness that didn't quite land. "You know the rules. At 17, your placement options are severely limited. And with the incident at the Miller house," she trailed off, letting the accusation hang in the air. "The incident was me refusing to let Mr. Miller lock Mia in her room for not finishing her dinner. It ended with shouting, a slammed door, and a phone call. It always ended with a phone call. I didn't say anything. I just stared back at her, feeling the familiar cold knot of anger and helplessness tighten in my gut. 2 years of being told to be grateful. 2 years of Mia learning to make herself smaller and smaller. "We have no other family placements," she continued, shuffling papers on her desk. The papers were our lives, condensed into bureaucratic jargon and incident reports. "And we can't find a group home that will take you both on such short notice, especially given—" Again, the pause. "Given my record. A record of being protective, of talking back, of not being a ghost in someone else's house." "So what happens now?" I asked. The words came out scraped and raw. "You separate us." It wasn't a question. It was the thing I'd been fighting against since our mom died, the nightmare that lived in the back of my mind. The system's final solution. Mia's head snapped up. Her eyes, wide and terrified, found mine. I gave her a tiny shake of my head, a silent promise I wasn't sure I could keep. "Don't worry, I've got this." Ms. Albright sighed, a long, weary sound. She picked up a single folded document. It was old, the creases soft, the paper yellowed at the edges. "There is one thing," she said, her tone shifting. It wasn't hope, but something like it, a last resort. "A legal loose end. We were contacted by a county clerk from up north. It seems your maternal grandfather, a Mr. Alistair Finch, passed away some time ago. His estate has been in probate. It's not much." She slid the paper across the desk. It was a deed to a property in a town I'd never heard of, a place called Sparrow Creek. "He left it to your mother," Ms. Albright explained. "And since she's deceased, it passes to you and Mia, jointly." I stared at the name, Alistair Finch, a ghost. A man who had existed only in a few faded photographs our mom kept in a shoebox, a man who had vanished from her life long before we were born. "Abandoned her," she'd said once, her voice bitter. "He just left." "So we have a house?" Mia whispered, a flicker of impossible hope in her voice. Miss Albright held up a hand. "I wouldn't call it a house, Mia. Not anymore. The property has been flagged by the county. It's derelict. Condemned, officially. The taxes haven't been paid in years.
According to the clerk, the main house is likely uninhabitable. The land is worthless to developers because it's landlocked and zoned for agriculture only. She leaned forward, her expression turning grim. The county is willing to forgive the back taxes if you sign it over to them. They'll demolish the structures and let the land go fallow. You'll get a check for a few $100s for your trouble. Enough to tide you over for a bit, Leo, until you find work. And we can find a good, stable home for Mia. There it was. The offer. The ultimatum. Take the easy money. Surrender the last piece of our family we never knew we had, and let them tear us apart. Or what? I asked, my voice low. Or you can claim it, she said, shrugging, as if the idea were absurd. It's yours, legally.
But Leo, you have to understand. You're 17. You have no money, no job. The property is hours from here in the middle of nowhere. There's no power, no water. The school district is miles away. It's not a viable option. It's a liability, not an asset. I looked at the deed. The paper felt heavy, ancient. It was a piece of a story we didn't know, from a man we'd been taught to resent. A worthless, ruined place. But it was ours. It was the only thing in the entire world that was ours. I looked at Mia, at the terror in her eyes giving way to a desperate question. She wasn't looking at Ms. Albright. She was looking at me, waiting for me to decide. In that silent, sterile office, with the clock ticking away the last moments of our life together, the choice wasn't a choice at all. It was the only move left on the board. We'll take it, I said. The words tasted like jumping off a cliff. Ms. Albright stared at me, her mouth a thin line of professional disapproval. Leo, be serious. This is not a game. This is your sister's future. I am serious, I said, my voice shaking but firm. I slid the deed back into my pocket. It's ours. We're going. She argued. She reasoned. She laid out the inevitable hardships in a calm, rational voice that made me want to scream. Hunger, cold, isolation. The fact that child services could, and likely would, intervene the moment they deemed the environment unsuitable for Mia. But I heard none of it. All I heard was the ticking clock and the unspoken promise I'd made to my sister. All I saw was the door to this office and the road leading away from it. An hour later, we were standing on a street corner with 2 backpacks, a duffel bag, and a one-way bus ticket to a town we couldn't find on the cracked map at the station. The rain had finally started, a cold drizzle that soaked into the shoulders of my jacket. Mia huddled next to me, shivering. I put my arm around her. It's going to be an adventure, I said, trying to make my voice sound bright, like the heroes in the books she loved. She looked up at me, her face pale in the gray light. She didn't look convinced. I wasn't convinced either. But as the bus pulled up to the curb, its brakes hissing like a tired monster, I knew one thing for sure. We were still together. For now, that was enough. The bus ride was a slow, rattling journey out of the world we knew. The city's dense grid of concrete and glass slowly dissolved into sprawling suburbs, then faded into the brown, dormant fields of early spring. Mia fell asleep against my shoulder an hour in, exhausted by the stress of the day. I stayed awake, watching the landscape change. The sky was a vast, indifferent gray. The trees were skeletal, their bare branches clawing at the clouds. Every mile marker we passed felt like a nail being hammered into the coffin of our old life. I traced the address on the deed with my thumb. 147 Finch Hollow Road. It sounded like something from a storybook, a place that couldn't possibly be real. My grandfather, Alistair Finch. I tried to picture him, tried to feel some connection to the name, but there was nothing. Just a void, a question mark. Why did he leave? Why did he leave this broken-down farm to a daughter he'd abandoned, and by extension, to us? Was it a final, cruel joke? Or something else? The questions circled in my head, pointless and sharp. The bus dropped us off at a crossroads with a single, blinking yellow light. There was a gas station with a boarded-up convenience store and a sign for Sparrow Creek that was so rusted you could barely read the name. The bus pulled away, leaving us in a profound and sudden silence, broken only by the wind whistling through the telephone wires. According to the old man at the gas pump, Finch Hollow Road was another 3 miles out. There were no taxis, no other buses. "Ain't much out that way," he'd said, squinting at us. "Ain't been for a long time." So we walked. The road was cracked asphalt that quickly turned to gravel, then to dirt. The air was different here. It smelled of damp earth, of wet leaves, of decay and renewal all at once. It was clean and cold, and it filled my lungs in a way city air never had. Our duffel bag grew heavier with every step. Mia was quiet, her small legs working hard to keep up. The hope she'd shown in the office was gone, replaced by a weary apprehension. We were two ghosts walking down a forgotten road, the sky pressing down on us. After what felt like an eternity, we saw it. A rusted, wrought-iron gate hanging crookedly on a stone pillar. One half of the gate was missing entirely. A faded wooden sign, nailed to a tree, read, "Finch." This was it. We stepped through the gate. The driveway was almost completely reclaimed by nature. Weeds grew thick and high, and young saplings pushed their way through cracks in the packed earth. And then, through a break in the trees, we saw the house. Ms. Albright's words came back to me. I wouldn't call it a house, not anymore. She was right. It was a skeleton. A 2-story farmhouse, probably handsome once, now stood sagging and defeated. The porch roof had collapsed on one side, its pillars lying in a tangle of rotten wood. Windows were boarded up, but the ones that weren't were dark, broken eyes. The paint had peeled away in long strips, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. It looked like it was being slowly swallowed by the earth. A lump formed in my throat. This wasn't a home, it was a grave. "Leo?" Mia's voice was a tiny thread of sound. "Is that it?" I couldn't answer. I just stood there, the weight of my decision crashing down on me. I had dragged my sister across the state for this. For a ruin. For a place that looked even more hopeless than the life we'd just left. The drizzle was turning into a steady, miserable rain. We were cold, we were tired, and we were standing in front of a monument to failure. My failure. We trudged toward the house, our feet sinking into the soft, muddy ground. The front door was swollen shut in its frame. I put my shoulder to it and pushed, again and again, until the wood groaned and splintered, and the door scraped open just enough for us to squeeze through. The inside was even worse. The air was thick with the smell of mold and damp and animal droppings. Furniture lay in disarray, covered in thick shrouds of dust and cobwebs. A fine layer of plaster dust covered everything, having fallen from the water-stained ceilings. It was dark, the only light coming from the broken windows and the crack in the door. It was a place of total and complete abandonment. We couldn't stay here. It was impossible. It was dangerous. Miss Albright had been right about everything. I felt a surge of panic, cold and sharp. What had I done? We retreated back outside into the rain, the sight of the decaying interior too much to bear. Mia was crying now, silent tears tracking paths through the grime on her cheeks. "It's okay," I said, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. "It's okay. We'll figure it out." My eyes scanned the property, desperate for anything, any sign of hope. And then I saw the barn. It was set back from the house, a large, classic structure with a gambrel roof. It was old, certainly, the red paint faded to a soft, dusky rose, but it looked solid. Unlike the house, its roofline was straight, its walls were plumb. It seemed to have weathered the decades with a stoic grace the house had lacked. "Come on," I said, grabbing Mia's hand and pulling her toward it. "Let's check the barn. It'll be dry in there at least." The huge sliding door of the barn was off its track on one side, but with our combined weight, we managed to shove it open a few feet, creating a dark gap. We slipped inside. The air in the barn was different from the house. It smelled of old hay, dry wood, and engine oil. It was vast and dark, the only light coming from the gap in the door and a few dusty windows high up in the loft. Beams of pale gray light cut through the gloom, illuminating swirling dust motes like tiny galaxies. It was mostly empty. A few pieces of rusted farm equipment sat in the corners like sleeping iron beasts. A stack of rotten hay bales slumped against one wall. But it was dry. The roof, from what I could tell, was sound. It was a shelter. It was something. We dropped our bags with a thud. The sound was swallowed by the immense space. I walked the perimeter, running my hand along the thick, timber-framed walls. The construction was incredible. Huge, hand-hewn beams joined with pegs, built to last for centuries. This place had been someone's pride and joy once. As I rounded the far corner, my hand brushed against something strange. The wall, made of wide, vertical planks of wood, was smooth and consistent. But here, in a section about 10 feet wide and 8 feet high, the texture was different. The planks were newer, or at least less weathered than the rest. They were fitted together with a precision that was almost seamless, and there were no visible nails or screws. It was a patch, but a perfect, deliberate one. I pressed against it. It was solid, unmoving. I knocked on it. The sound was a dull, dense thud, different from the hollow resonance of the walls around it. "Mia, come here," I called out. She came over, wiping her eyes. I had her knock on the wall, then on the patched section. "It sounds different," she said, her curiosity momentarily overriding her misery. "It's thicker." I ran my fingers along the edges of the patch, searching for a seam, a handle, a hidden latch. Nothing. It was sealed, perfectly and intentionally sealed. Why would someone patch a barn wall from the inside? And why do it so meticulously? A strange feeling prickled at the back of my neck, a sense of purpose. This wasn't a random repair. This was a concealment. I found a rusted old crowbar lying near the farm equipment. It was heavy in my hands. "Stand back," I told Mia. I wedged the tip of the crowbar into the hairline crack between the patch and the original wall. I put all my weight on it. The old wood groaned in protest. A splinter shot out. But it held. I tried again, leveraging my body against the tool, my muscles straining. There was a sharp crack, like a gunshot in the silent barn. A line of daylight, thin as a razor's edge, appeared along the top of the seam. My heart hammered against my ribs. There was something behind this wall. There was something more to this place than just ruin and decay. With a surge of adrenaline, I jammed the crowbar in again and heaved. The wood splintered, and then a whole section of the patched wall gave way, swinging inward on hidden hinges with a long, mournful screech. It wasn't a patch. It was a door. Behind it was not the outside of the barn, but a pocket of impossible darkness. A space that smelled not of hay and oil, but of paper, leather, and time itself. We had found a room that had been waiting, sealed and silent, for 50 years. The air that spilled out of the hidden opening was cool and utterly still, carrying the scent of a place untouched by the modern world. It was the dry, clean smell of old books, of dried ink, of things carefully preserved. Mia and I stood at the threshold, peering into the darkness. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy with a mixture of fear and excitement. I turned on the flashlight, and the beam cut a sharp white cone into the black. It wasn't a large room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, tucked into the massive structure of the barn like a secret. The walls were lined with smooth, planed wood, and unlike the rest of the barn, they were insulated. A single, bare bulb hung from the ceiling on a frayed cord, a relic of a time when this place had power. A sturdy wooden workbench ran along the far wall. On it sat tools, not for farming, but for finer work. Calipers, drafting compasses, magnifying glasses, all laid out with a neatness that defied the half-century of neglect. It was a study, a workshop, a sanctuary. Against the left wall was a bookshelf, crammed with books on engineering, geology, and law. Their spines were faded but unbroken. On the right wall, a large drafting table was tilted at an angle. Pinned to its surface, under a sheet of yellowed plastic, was a detailed map of the property and the surrounding area. My light traced over the map, revealing hand-drawn notations and survey lines. This wasn't the work of a simple farmer. This was the work of a methodical, intelligent man. And in the center of the room, sitting on a small, sturdy wooden stool, was a heavy, olive-green metal box. It was a military-style footlocker, secured with a thick, brass padlock. Taped to the top of the box was a cream-colored envelope, the paper thick and expensive. My name, Leo, was written on it in a strong, elegant script. My name. Not my mother's. Mine. My breath caught in my chest. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a relic of the past we had stumbled upon. This was a message. A package left specifically for me. "Leo, what is it?" Mia whispered, her hand gripping the back of my jacket. I didn't answer. I stepped into the room, my footsteps echoing slightly in the confined space. The floor was clean. There were no animal droppings, no signs of intrusion. The seal had held. I ran my hand over the cool metal of the box. It felt impossibly real, a solid object in a world that had become fluid and uncertain. With trembling fingers, I peeled the envelope from the lid. The tape was old and brittle, and it came away with a faint crackle. I turned it over. There was no other writing, no return address, just my name and the weight of the paper in my hand. I sat down on the dusty floor, leaning my back against the bookshelf. Mia sat beside me, tucking herself under my arm. The beam of my phone's flashlight created a small, intimate circle of light in the vast darkness of the barn. Slowly, carefully, I opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. The script was the same as on the envelope, black ink flowing across the page in confident, deliberate strokes. I took a deep breath and began to read it aloud, my voice a low murmur in the quiet room. "Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, then many things have happened. I am gone. Your mother is gone. And the world has failed you in ways I prayed it never would. I am your grandfather, Alistair Finch, and I am sorry." I had to stop. The words, so direct, so personal, struck me with the force of a physical blow. I'd spent my whole life with a caricature of this man in my head, a deserter, a ghost. But the voice in this letter was of a man who knew me, who was speaking directly to me across time. Mia squeezed my arm, and I continued. "I did not abandon your mother. I was forced to leave. There are things you must understand about this land, about this family. I was an engineer. I discovered something valuable under this property. Not oil, not gold,
but something just as precious in this part of the country. A deep, clean, and vast aquifer.
Enough water to sustain this entire region for 100 years. My eyes flickered to the map on the drafting table, the hand-drawn lines suddenly making a terrifying kind of sense. A development corporation, a company called Northridge Holdings, found out. They wanted the land. They wanted the water rights. They tried to buy me out, but their offer was an insult, and their plans would have destroyed the local water table for every small farm in this valley. I refused. I fought them. I used my knowledge of the law and the land to block them at every turn. The script became tighter here, the pressure of the pen heavier. They do not play fair. They threatened me. When that didn't work, they threatened your grandmother. And then they threatened your mother, who was just a little girl. They made it clear that if I did not walk away, my family would pay the price. They had the power, the money, the connections to make it happen. I was one man against a machine. So I made a choice. The hardest choice of my life. I staged a financial collapse. I made it look like I was broke, ruined by my own stubbornness. I signed papers that gave them control over adjacent lands, making this plot seem worthless and inaccessible. And then I disappeared. I gave up my home, my name, and my daughter to ensure she would be safe. I thought they would forget. I thought the threat would pass. I looked up from the letter, my head spinning. The story my mom had told me, the story of abandonment, wasn't the truth. It was the story he had wanted the world to believe. It was a shield. He hadn't left her. He had sacrificed everything for her. A wave of grief, sharp and profound, washed over me. Grief for the man I never knew. Grief for the mother who had lived her whole life believing she was unwanted. I cried. I couldn't help it. Deep, silent sobs that shook my entire body. I cried for the years of resentment, for the hollow space in our family that had been filled with a lie. Mia held on to me, her own tears soaking my sleeve. She was crying for a grandfather she'd never met, and for a grandmother who died thinking her father didn't love her. We sat there for a long time in the cold, dusty room, mourning a man and a truth we had only just discovered. After a while, my sobs subsided into a raw, hollow ache. I picked up the letter again, my hands steady now. There was more. I never stopped watching over her, from a distance. I saw her grow up. I saw when she had you. I wanted to come back, but the threat from Northridge never truly went away. They are patient. They are vultures. I spent the rest of my life preparing for a day like this. A day when my grandchildren might need a place to stand, a foundation to build on when the rest of the world had washed away. This room, this barn, this land, it is more than it seems. It is an ark. I have left you tools, not a fortune. The lock on the box can be opened with the key hidden inside the spine of the thickest book on the shelf, Foundations of Civil Engineering. Inside the box, you will find enough cash to survive for a short time. Do not be foolish with it. It is seed money, nothing more. You will also find a set of keys. They do not open anything in this barn. They are for the house. The house is a decoy, meant to look ruined and worthless, but it is not. Like everything else here, its true value is hidden. Look for the place where the sun does not shine at noon. Your fight, if you choose to accept it, is the same one I faced. You can take the money and run, disappear, as I did. Or you can stay. You can build. You can fight. The choice is yours now. Whatever you decide, know this. I was not a perfect man, but I loved your mother. And I love you. Be brave. Be smart. Be better than I was. Your grandfather, Alistair. I finished reading, and the silence that followed was heavy, filled with the weight of his words, his sacrifice. The story of our lives had been rewritten. We were not the forgotten descendants of a man who ran away. We were the heirs to a legacy of defiance. We were the keepers of a secret. The cold, which had seemed so oppressive just an hour ago, was now a secondary concern. A new feeling was taking root in my chest, pushing aside the despair. It was a fragile, unfamiliar thing. It was hope. But it was a different kind of hope from the one Mia had in the social worker's office. This wasn't the passive hope of being rescued. This was the fierce, active hope that comes from being given a mission. I looked at Mia. Her face was tear-streaked and pale in the phone's light, but her eyes were clear. The fear was gone, replaced by a look of solemn understanding. "What do we do, Leo?" she asked. Her voice was steady. She wasn't asking me to save her anymore. She was asking what we were going to do. We were a team. I stood up and walked to the bookshelf. I ran my fingers over the spines, the titles a foreign language of science and logic. Principles of hydrology, structural analysis, and there, the thickest one of all, a heavy blue volume. Foundations of Civil Engineering. My fingers found a slight bulge in the worn fabric of the spine. I carefully worked my thumbnail under it and pried it open. A small, intricately shaped brass key fell into my palm. It was old, but it gleamed in the light. It was the key to the box, the key to our survival. I knelt by the footlocker and inserted the key into the heavy brass padlock. It turned with a satisfying, solid click. The lock sprang open. I lifted the heavy lid. Inside, nestled in neat, paper-banded stacks, was cash. 50s and 20s. It wasn't a king's ransom, but it was more money than I had ever seen in one place. I counted out one stack. $1,000. There were 10 stacks. $10,000. To a 17-year-old with nothing, it felt like $1 million. It was food. It was warm clothes. It was a generator. It was time. Beneath the cash was a leather pouch. I opened it. Inside was a ring of old-fashioned skeleton keys, heavy and iron, and a single, smaller, more modern-looking key. The keys to the house. The keys to the next part of the puzzle. I sat back on my heels, the enormity of it all washing over me. We had a choice. The letter had made that clear. We could take this money, walk back down that dirt road, and disappear. We could buy a used car, find a cheap apartment in some anonymous town, and try to build a normal life. No one would blame us. It was the sensible thing to do. Or we could stay. We could stay on this cold, ruined piece of land and take up our grandfather's fight. We could try to uncover the secrets of the house, to understand the legacy he had left us. It was a dangerous, uncertain path, a path that led toward a powerful, faceless enemy. For a moment, I let myself imagine the easy way out. The feel of a warm apartment, the security of a steady job, Mia safe in a real school. It was tempting. It was everything I'd ever wanted for us. But then I looked around the secret room. I looked at the books, the tools, the map. I looked at the letter, at the love and pain and hope poured into every word. This place wasn't just land. It was a story. Our story. Running away would mean leaving that story unfinished. It would mean validating the lie that our grandfather had built to protect us. It would mean letting Northridge Holdings win. And what kind of life would we be running to? A life of looking over our shoulders? A life built on the foundation of a secret we were too afraid to confront. A life where we were still, ultimately, powerless. No. That was the old way of thinking. The thinking of a kid trapped in the system. We weren't just victims anymore. Our grandfather had given us more than just money and a piece of land. He had given us agency. He had given us a choice. And right now, in this moment, I think it's important to just pause. If you've made it this far into our story, thank you. It means a lot. This is the point where everything changed for us. It's a moment I think a lot of people face in their own lives, maybe in a different way. The moment you have to decide whether to take the easy path or to stand your ground on something that matters, even if it's harder. Have you ever had a moment like that? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And I think sharing these stories is how we remind each other that we're not alone in our fights. We're building a community here of people who get it. So if this is hitting home for you, please consider subscribing. It helps more than you know. Now let's get back to that cold barn with a box of money and a life-altering choice. I looked at Mia. She was watching me, her expression unreadable. I held up the ring of old keys. He said to look for the place where the sun doesn't shine at noon, I said. A slow smile spread across her face. It was the first real smile I had seen from her all day. The cellar, she said, her voice bright with discovery. Or a north-facing wall. Yeah, I said, feeling a matching smile on my own face. Or under the porch. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were solving a mystery. We were on an adventure. I closed the lid of the footlocker, leaving the money inside for now. We'd take what we needed, but its real purpose wasn't to be spent. It was to be used. I pocketed the keys. Let's go to the house, I said. We left the secret room, pulling the heavy, concealed door shut behind us. It clicked into place, the seam, once again, almost invisible. The barn returned to being just a barn, its secret kept safe. Armed with the keys and a renewed sense of purpose, we walked back out into the rain, which had now softened to a persistent mist. The ruined house no longer looked like a grave, it looked like a challenge. The front door was still wedged open. We slipped back into the damp, decaying interior. This time, I wasn't overwhelmed by the despair of it. I was looking at it with new eyes, my grandfather's eyes. The house is a decoy. I ran my phone's light over the water-stained walls, the collapsed plaster, the overturned furniture. It was a masterful illusion. The damage was real, but it felt cosmetic. The underlying structure, the bones of the house, seemed solid, just like the barn. We started with the cellar. An old wooden door in the kitchen floor led down to it. I found the key on the ring that fit the rusted lock. The door lifted, revealing a set of steep stone steps descending into a black, earthy-smelling space. Where the sun doesn't shine at noon, Mia whispered, clutching my arm. We went down carefully. The cellar was damp and lined with stone. Shelves filled with empty, dust-covered canning jars lined the walls. We spent an hour down there, tapping walls, checking the packed earth floor for loose sections, examining every nook and cranny. We found nothing but spiders and forgotten preserves that had turned into dark, unidentifiable sludge. Next, we checked the north-facing walls on both floors. We pushed on paneling, looked for seams, measured rooms to see if the dimensions matched the exterior. Nothing. The frustration began to creep back in. The day was fading, and the house was growing colder and darker. The initial excitement was wearing off, replaced by the grim reality of our situation. We were two kids in a cold, dark, broken house, chasing a riddle left by a dead man. Maybe we were crazy. Maybe we should have just taken the money. We ended up on the front porch, huddled together out of the worst of the mist. The part of the porch that hadn't collapsed was still sturdy. We sat on the top step, looking out at the overgrown yard. The sun doesn't shine at noon, Mia repeated, more to herself than to me. She was tracing patterns on the dusty floorboards with her finger. Under the porch? I suggested, though my energy was flagging. We'd have to crawl around in the mud and the dark. I wasn't looking forward to it. No, she said, her voice suddenly sharp. She pointed to the floor of the porch itself. Here, Leo, look. I looked where she was pointing. The main part of the porch floor was made of standard width planks, but right in the center, directly in front of the main door, was a square section, about 3 feet by 3 feet,
where the planks were laid in a different pattern, a herringbone design. It was a decorative touch, something you might not notice unless you were looking for it. "It's right under the porch roof," she said, her eyes wide with excitement. "The roof hangs over it."
Even at noon, when the sun is directly overhead, this spot would still be in shadow. My heart started to pound again. She was right. It was clever. It was exactly the kind of lateral thinking a man like our grandfather would use. It was a riddle hidden in plain sight. I knelt down and examined the herringbone section. There were no visible hinges or handles, but as I ran my fingers along the edges, I felt it. On the side closest to the house, there was a tiny, almost imperceptible hole drilled into the edge of one of the planks. It was no bigger than the tip of a pen. It had to be a keyhole. I pulled out the ring of keys. Most were large, skeletal, and clearly for the old door locks. But there was the other one, the small, modern-looking key. It looked like a key for a cabinet or a lockbox. I held my breath and inserted the tip of the key into the tiny hole. It slid in perfectly. I turned it. There was a faint click from beneath the floorboards. I looked around for something to pry with, but I didn't need it. A section of the herringbone pattern had lifted by a fraction of an inch. A trap door. I worked my fingers into the gap and lifted. It was heavy, made of thick, solid wood, but it swung upward on well-oiled hinges, revealing a dark, square cavity beneath the porch. My phone's light cut into the darkness. Inside the cavity, protected from the damp by a thick lining of tar paper, was another metal box. This one was larger than the one in the barn, a heavy-duty steel footlocker, the kind used for tools or sensitive equipment. It wasn't locked with a key. It was secured by a combination dial. A wave of disappointment washed over me. A combination lock. We were so close. How could we possibly know the combination? There was no other letter, no other clue. I slumped back, the trap door still open, the black square of the hole like a taunt. "Did the letter say anything else?" Mia asked. "Any numbers?" I pulled the creased letter from my pocket and scanned it again, desperately. Nothing. Just words. Engineering terms, legal jargon, emotional confessions. No numbers, no codes. I read it aloud again, hoping we had missed something. The thickest book on the shelf, Foundations of Civil Engineering. The place where the sun does not shine at noon. Nothing. It was hopeless. I was about to close the trap door, to admit defeat for the night, when Mia spoke up. "Leo," she said softly, "read the first part again, the part about the water." I found the passage. I discovered something valuable under this property, a deep, clean, and vast aquifer. Enough water to sustain this entire region for 100 years. "What if the numbers are in there somewhere?" she said. "In the other books? In the map?" It was a long shot, but it was the only shot we had. We were about to head back to the barn when my eyes fell on the drafting table map again in my mind's eye. The hand-drawn notations, the survey lines. I hadn't paid close enough attention. I had been too overwhelmed. "Wait here," I told Mia. I sprinted back to the barn, my feet slipping in the mud. I burst into the silent, dark space, fumbled the hidden door open, and stepped back into the secret room. I aimed my phone's light at the drafting table. The map was a topographical survey of our land, but layered over it were my grandfather's notes. Depths, flow rates, geological strata. And in the bottom right-hand corner, in a neat, ruled box, was a summary. Title: Finch Aquifer Survey, Final Assessment. And below it, a series of numbers. Depth at primary well point, 815 feet. Estimated volume, 3.4 billion cubic meters. Recharge rate,
57 cubic feet per second. The numbers.
They had been there all along, not as a code, but as data. My grandfather wasn't a spy. He was an engineer. He would use numbers that were meaningful to him. I fumbled in my pocket for a pen I'd grabbed from the social worker's office and scribbled them on my palm. 815, 34, 57. It was a long shot, but it felt right. I raced back to the house, my heart hammering. Mia was waiting on the porch, her face a pale oval in the twilight. "I think I have it," I panted, kneeling by the open trapdoor. I took a deep breath to steady my hands and turned the dial on the lock. Right to 8. Left past 8 once, then to 1. Right past 1 to 5. The dial stopped. I tried again. Right to 8. Left to 1. Right to 5. No, that wasn't how these worked. I thought back to the cheap combination lock I had for my gym locker in 9th grade. Right, left, right. 3 numbers. Maybe it was just the depth. 815. I took a breath. Right to 8. Left passing 8 once to 1. Right to 5. The lock didn't budge. My hope began to drain away. It was just a coincidence. "Try the other ones," Mia urged. "Maybe it's a different set." I tried the volume, 3 to 4. Not enough numbers. The recharge rate, 5 to 7. Same problem. I sat back, defeated. The numbers were meaningless. It was just a stupid guess. And then my eyes landed on the date at the top of my grandfather's letter. A date he had written 50 years ago. April 5th, 1973. 4573. Could it be that simple? A date? I shook my head. He was a man of science, of data, but he was also a man who had lost his family. Maybe some dates mattered more than data. I tried it. 4, 5, 7, 3. 4 numbers. The lock had a place for 4. I tried 4573. Nothing. My mind was racing, turning over the details. The letter, the room, the map. What had I missed? I thought about the property itself, the address. 147 Finch Hollow Road. 147. I tried it. Right to 1, left past 1 to 4, right to 7. The shackle pulled tight, but didn't release. Nothing. This was impossible. We were exhausted, cold, and running out of light. I was ready to give up, to slam the trapdoor shut and deal with it in the morning. But as I stared at the lock, my gaze unfocused, the numbers I'd written on my palm seemed to rearrange themselves. 815, 34, 57. What if it wasn't just one set? What if it was all of them, combined? A 6-digit combination. 8153457? No, that was 7 digits. My brain felt like sludge. "Leo," Mia said, her voice quiet but clear. "What if it's simpler? What was the most important thing to him?" I looked at the letter, at the words I had read so many times now. I gave up my home, my name, and my daughter to ensure she would be safe. His daughter, our mother, her name was Eleanor. That was useless. But what about her birthday? We didn't know it. It wasn't in the file. Mom never celebrated it. Another dead end. We were back to the numbers from the map. 815, 34, 57. I stared at them, written on my hand. And then I saw it. A 6-digit number, not a combination of all of them, but a sequence. The depth, 815 feet, and the rate, 57 cubic feet per second. And the volume, 3.4 billion. What if it wasn't the numbers themselves, but the address and the date? 147 Finch Hollow Road, April 5th, 14745. 5 numbers. The lock seemed to be a standard 3-number turnstile. Okay, back to basics. Back to the engineer. What would an engineer use? Something precise. Something foundational. I looked at the title of the book again in my mind. Foundations of Civil Engineering. The key was there. What else could be there? I didn't have the book in front of me. I was about to send Mia to get it when a new thought struck me, so simple and obvious I felt like an idiot. The combination wasn't hidden in a book or a map. It was in the letter. It had to be. I smoothed the paper out one last time. I read it slowly, word by word. And then I saw it. A single sentence near the end. Your fight, if you choose to accept it, is the same one I faced. The same one. 1. I have left you tools, not a fortune. 2. Be brave, be smart, be better than I was. 3. 1, 2, 3. It was absurd. It was a child's riddle. It couldn't possibly be that simple. But what if it was? What if all the complex clues, the map, the hidden room, were just tests of our persistence, and the final lock was a test of our ability to see the simple truth? A test of faith in him? With a feeling of utter foolishness, I spun the dial. Right to 1. Left past 1 to 2. Right to 3. I pulled on the shackle. It slid open with a soft, metallic sigh. For a moment, I just stared at it, unable to believe it. Mia let out a gasp. It had worked. It was the simplest answer of all. With my heart pounding, I lifted the heavy steel lid. The sight that met my eyes stole the air from my lungs. The box was full. Not with tools, not with more letters, but with money. Stacks and stacks of it, all $100 bills, wrapped in bank bands. It was an impossible amount, far, far more than the $10,000 in the barn. I lifted out a stack. The band said $10,000. I started counting the stacks. 10, 20, 30. I lost count somewhere around 50. There had to be over $500,000 in this box. But that wasn't all. Beneath the layers of cash was a thick, waterproof portfolio. I lifted it out. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely open it. Inside were documents, legal papers, geological surveys, far more detailed than the one on the map. Sworn affidavits from 2 other local farmers who had been threatened by Northridge Holdings, their signatures notarized and dated. And copies of internal Northridge memos, detailing their strategy to acquire the water rights through intimidation and political pressure. It was a complete dossier, a weapon. My grandfather hadn't just run away and hidden. He had spent the rest of his life building a case. He'd been gathering evidence, creating a war chest, waiting for the right moment, or the right person, to continue the fight. This money wasn't just an inheritance, it was funding. The documents weren't just history, they were ammunition. And sitting on top of the documents was one last envelope, smaller than the first. On the front, in the same elegant script, were 2 words: the choice. I opened it. The letter inside was short, almost brutal in its simplicity. Leo, this is the devil's bargain. In this portfolio is enough evidence to expose Northridge Holdings for their criminal conspiracy. A good lawyer could use it to bring them to their knees. It would be a long, public, and dangerous fight. It would make you a target, just as I was. Or, there is another option. The memos also contain evidence of internal fraud, unrelated to the land deals. It is enough to blackmail them. A man I trust, a lawyer named Ben Carter in Sparrow Creek, knows how to make the approach. His number is in here. Northridge will pay you millions for your silence. They will buy the land from you for a fortune, and you and your sister will be safe and wealthy for the rest of your lives. You can walk away, and no one will ever know. The choice is this: Justice or peace? You cannot have both. I could not make this choice for you. I pray you choose wisely. The letter fell from my fingers. I looked at the money. I looked at the portfolio. Justice or peace? A public fight or a private fortune? Expose the rot or take the bribe and live in comfort? My grandfather hadn't just left us a legacy. He had left us a burden, a moral test of a magnitude I couldn't comprehend. All my life, all I had wanted was safety, a warm bed, enough food, a life for my sister free from fear and uncertainty. The box offered that. It offered peace, paid for with silence. It was the ultimate easy way out. But the portfolio, it offered something else. A chance to finish what he started. A chance to clear his name. A chance to protect the other families in this valley. A chance to be the kind of person he had challenged me to be. Brave. Smart. Better. I looked at Mia. She hadn't read the letter, but she saw it on my face. She looked from the money to the portfolio, her young face serious. "What did he say?" she asked. I explained it to her. The two paths, the bribe, the fight. I laid it all out as clearly as I could. I didn't tell her what I thought we should do. I needed her to understand. I needed this to be our choice, together. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. The twilight had faded completely, and the world outside our small circle of light was pitch black. The only sound was the gentle patter of the mist on the roof. "He hid," she said finally. "He hid so Mom could be safe. He spent his whole life hiding." "Yes," I said. "Then we don't," she said, her voice small but fierce. "We don't hide." And that was it. The choice was made. It wasn't even a debate. In her simple 12-year-old logic, she had cut through all the fear and complexity and found the heart of it. Our grandfather had lived in the shadows so that one day his family could step into the light. Taking the money and disappearing would be a betrayal of his entire life's sacrifice. It would be choosing to stay in the shadows forever. I felt a profound sense of clarity settle over me. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. Northridge Holdings was a dragon, and we were two kids with a handful of paper swords. But for the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on solid ground. This land, this ruined farm, was our ground to defend. We carefully packed the portfolio and the money back into the box and closed the trap door, locking it. We carried the first box, with the $10,000, back to the barn. That night, we didn't sleep in the cold, dusty house. We slept in the secret room. It was the safest place in the world. We cleared a space on the floor, and, using our clothes for pillows and our jackets for blankets, we lay down in the silent, protected dark. The next morning, we woke up with the first pale light of dawn. The air was crisp and cold. We ate the last of the snacks from our backpacks. It was time to get to work. We took $200 from the box. We walked the 3 miles back to the crossroads. The old man at the gas station was there again. He looked surprised to see us. "Figured you'd be long gone," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "We're staying," I said. The words felt good, solid. I asked him where we could find a hardware store and a grocery store. He gave us directions to the town of Sparrow Creek, another 5 miles down the main road. He also told us a man named Earl had a truck and sometimes did odd jobs and deliveries. He pointed to a small house behind the station. We found Earl. He was a kind-faced man in his 60s with hands like worn leather. We hired him to drive us into town, wait for us, and drive us back with our supplies. In town, we were a spectacle. 2 grimy kids in worn-out city clothes. People stared. We ignored them. We went to the grocery store first. We bought bread, peanut butter, cheese, canned soup, apples, bottled water. Simple, non-perishable food, enough for a week. Then we went to the hardware store. The list in my head was long, born of a night of planning. A heavy-duty generator, gas cans, work gloves, a hammer, nails, a saw, thick plastic sheeting and a staple gun to cover the broken windows, cleaning supplies, buckets, a propane heater and a tank, 2 warm sleeping bags and sleeping pads. It was a huge pile of stuff. The man at the counter looked at our haul, then at me, then at the cash I put on the counter. He raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Earl helped us load everything into the back of his old pickup truck. He didn't ask any questions. On the drive back, I asked him if he knew a lawyer named Ben Carter. "Ben Carter," Earl said, his eyes on the road. "Sure, known him my whole life. His office is right there on Main Street. Smart fella. Honest, too. More than you can say for some." That was all I needed to know. The rest of the day was a blur of hard, physical labor. We wrestled the generator out of the truck and got it running. The sound of the engine was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. We plugged in a string of work lights, and for the first time, the dark, cavernous barn was filled with bright, steady light. We started on the house. We tore out the rotten, waterlogged carpet. We swept up years of dust and debris. We scrubbed the floors and walls with bleach and hot water heated on the propane heater. We sealed the broken windows with the plastic sheeting, creating a barrier against the wind and rain. It was back-breaking work. My muscles ached in ways I didn't know they could. My hands were raw and blistered, even through the gloves. But with every bucket of filthy water we tossed out, with every broken thing we carried out of the house, I felt lighter. We weren't just cleaning a house, we were reclaiming it. We were scrubbing away the neglect, the decay, the illusion of worthlessness. Mia worked right alongside me, a fierce determination on her face. She was no longer the scared little girl from the social worker's office. She was a pioneer, a builder. That night, we laid our new sleeping bags on the clean floor of what used to be the living room. The propane heater cast a warm, orange glow on the walls. We ate hot soup straight from the can. It was the best meal of my life. The house was still a wreck. The roof still leaked in places. The plumbing and electricity were still dead. But it was no longer a grave. It was a construction site. It was a beginning. It was home. The next day, I left Mia to continue the cleaning and I walked into town. I found Ben Carter's office on Main Street. It was a small, unassuming brick building. I took a deep breath and walked inside. Ben Carter was in his late 40s, with a calm, thoughtful face and kind eyes. He listened patiently as I told him everything. I didn't show him the documents, not yet. I just told him who I was and what my grandfather had left me. When I was finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at me for a long time. "I knew your grandfather," he said softly. "He was a good man, a stubborn man. He came to me a few times, years ago. He told me he was building a case. He told me that one day someone might come to me with the rest of it. I honestly never thought that day would come." He leaned forward. "Leo, what your grandfather did, it was for you. The choice he left you is a heavy one. If you go after Northridge publicly, they will fight back, and they will fight dirty. If you take the settlement, well, a lot of people might call you a fool for not taking it." "We're not taking it," I said. The words were firm, without a trace of doubt. A slow smile spread across his face. "That's what Alistair would have wanted to hear," he said. "All right, son. Let's get to work." I spent the next 2 weeks working. Half the day, I was at the farm with Mia, patching the roof, reinforcing the porch, making the house livable.
one small project at a time. The other half, I was in Ben Carter's office, going through the documents, helping him build the case. We learned that Northridge was now a massive, multi-state corporation, but their hunger for our land, for our water, had never gone away. They were just waiting.
Ben filed the first injunctions. He contacted the State Environmental Protection Agency. He started making noise, and Northridge noticed. A black car with tinted windows started parking at the end of Finch Hollow Road. They were watching us. The first letter arrived. It was from a high-priced law firm in the city. It was an offer. A generous offer to buy our worthless property for a sum that would have been life-changing just a month ago. It was the first move in their game. We ignored it. The work on the house continued. We were not just rebuilding a structure. We were rebuilding a life. We were putting down roots in the soil our grandfather had fought to protect. We were choosing justice over peace, and the fight was just beginning. It was a long road ahead, but for the first time, it felt like our road to choose. The story doesn't end there, of course. That was just the beginning of our fight, the beginning of us building our home. What I learned in that barn, and in the months that followed, was that inheritance isn't just about money or property. It's about the stories we carry and the choices we make when those stories are passed to us. It's about deciding whether to run from the fights of our parents and grandparents or to stand up and finish them. We all inherit something. Maybe it's not a secret room and a box of money. Maybe it's a habit, a belief, a wound, or a strength. The question is, what do you do with it? Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you believe in second chances and fighting for what's right, please subscribe to the channel and become part of this community. Share your own stories of inheritance, of the choices you've made, in the comments below. I'll be reading them. Because every story of choosing the harder right over the easier wrong makes the world a little bit stronger. You are not alone in your fight.